be. Perfect. Okay, so everyone, welcome back. This is the second session of the 2023 Oregon Reference Summit online conference. I'm Lauren Arnold. I'm the Collection Development Manager at Jackson County Library Services, and I'm going to be your moderator for the session. Folks who are attending, if you haven't already, please take a moment to mute your microphone. If you have questions, go ahead and use the chat, and I'll be reading those aloud. You're also welcome to raise your hand, and I can call you out to speak it aloud, but I don't know about you, I prefer to chat, so feel free to just go ahead and do that. There will be time allowed at the end of the presentation for questions, but if you have any questions in the meantime, like I said, just throw them in the chat, and I'll read those aloud to Liz, or raise your hand and you can unmute yourself when I call you out. So this next presentation is Libraries as Partners in Natural Disasters, Meeting the Civil Legal Reference Needs of Communities in Crisis. Our presenter is Liz Mills, Program Manager at WebJunction. This is a 50-minute long session, and then we're going to add a Q&A at the end. That's really it. Liz, please take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for that introduction, and thank you all for having me here today. As Lauren said, I'm going to be talking about the role of civil legal reference in supporting and informing communities before, during, and after natural disasters that can and do occur in Oregon as well as elsewhere. As Lauren said, I am a program manager at WebJunction, a program of OCLC research, where we offer self-paced online courses, webinars, and articles that help library staff learn and grow in their jobs. And so I'm going to talk with you about some courses that we have that will help prepare you to meet the many civil legal needs that arise as a result of natural disasters. And then there is also a handout available for you that's entitled Civil Legal Aid During Disasters. And it features some questions and prompts that can help you build your action plan for your library and your community before the next natural disaster occurs. So we know that disasters of all kinds are disruptive, devastating, and unfortunately ever more frequent. I'm up in Washington State, and we are dealing with some air quality issues from some fires from Canada. And this fire season is starting now in May. And so we are all affected. And one of the best things that we can do is to educate ourselves and to be prepared. So here are our goals for today. I hope you will become familiar with civil legal reference, especially as it relates to natural disasters. You'll learn various reference tips and key resources to provide information and referrals to address community members' civil legal turmoil. You'll learn the importance of applying trauma-informed approaches to the ways that you interface with the community amidst the emotional intensity of disaster, as well as focus on your own self-care during these difficult times. And then you'll learn how to create a locally relevant action plan to prepare your library before disaster strikes. So here's a basic fact. Americans struggle with a host of civil legal problems every day, including securing and protecting basic needs such as housing, healthcare, income maintenance, consumer legal issues, immigration, and increasingly disaster recovery assistance. And these civil legal problems are exacerbated by a natural disaster, and at the same time compounded by new legal problems that occur because of the disaster. So I want to take a step back and talk about the differences between civil versus criminal law. One of the key differences for understanding the civil legal justice gap is that there is no guarantee of an attorney provided by the state in a civil matter. This lack of guaranteed representation, in addition to other barriers to civil legal justice, disproportionately affect low-income people in the United States, creating this justice gap, this divide between the civil legal needs of low-income people and access to the resources to meet those needs. And the statistics are startling. A 2022 study found that almost 3/4 of low-income households experienced at least one civil legal problem. 1 in 4 have experienced more than 6 legal problems during the year. And those percentages can be even higher for groups like seniors and veterans and people with disabilities. 2 in 5, about 39%, experienced 5 or more problems, and 1 in 5, 20%, experienced 10 or more civil legal problems. And the most common types of problems are consumer issues, healthcare, housing, income maintenance. And in 92% of substantial civil legal problems that are reported by low-income Americans, these people received inadequate or no legal help. So we can see that the problem is both broad and deep. And, why aren't these needs being met? And it's like a lot of other things that we're dealing with in our society. There are structural and emotional barriers. Legal issues can be about intensely personal and often traumatic life events. Many people experience fear and alienation when they're dealing with the legal system. Language barriers can be common. And then many people experience anxiety and fear with unfamiliar legal technology. So what can we do as reference librarians? Well, public libraries are well positioned to help reduce the civil legal justice gap by providing and increasing access to information and resources. Libraries are often the first place that people turn to after a disaster. So why libraries? I'm sure we could all answer this question. Libraries are a primary and trusted provider of free access to information and the internet. Library staff have research, reference, and organizational skill sets. Libraries play a community anchor role in connecting patrons to essential information and services. Libraries understand the importance of the neutrality required to provide legal information, and libraries are always the first stop for those seeking information and referral services. And I'm from Pittsburgh, so I was very happy to see the Carnegie Public Library there. So now I'd like to hear from you, and I hope you'll put some answers in the chat. What natural disasters has your community faced or are you preparing for? I'll give you a couple minutes to think about that and add some thoughts into the chat. All right, let's see. Earthquakes, forest fires, wildfires, heat wave, yeah. Earthquakes, floods, definitely. Snowstorms, yeah. Wildfires, heat waves, ice storms. I feel like Oregon, I live in Washington State, but I feel like Oregon is interesting because you in many ways have some of the Midwest type weather. I think the way that your state is set up geographically, it's a little bit different than Washington State. So pandemic, yes, definitely another kind of natural disaster for sure. Maybe another 30 seconds if anyone has some other ideas on disasters that you've preparing for. Not disaster per se, my previous library really had to prepare for the eclipse due to the volume of people. Yes, and I have heard that there is already like, oh no, we have to deal with the eclipse again with what's coming next. Yeah, so it could be a natural disaster, or it could be just a big event where you have a lot of maybe your resources and your time and staff are a little more taxed than usual. All right, well, those were some great answers. These are a few of the natural disasters that often occur in Oregon, according to the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. And so many of these are ones that you mentioned in the chat. I might also point out, I don't think anyone said landslides, tsunamis, volcanic hazards, and then winter storms came up. So we are familiar with what natural disasters can do to our communities and the impact they can have at our libraries. So let's look at the immediate needs that your library and your community face in the wake of disaster. So this happens, disaster occurs, power's out, the roads are flooded or jammed with traffic as people try and evacuate, communication channels are jammed, stores, pharmacies, gas stations are shut down. There's a lot of different things going on at the same time that are really causing a lot of stress. So key things to expect in a disaster is that there's a lack of food and shelter and water. Power is out, making it difficult to communicate, making it difficult to move around. You may not be able to get supplies like diapers or medication and things like that. So there's just lots going on in the event of a disaster. Immediately after the disaster, stabilizing the situation and providing immediate relief for survivors are paramount. And although there's little to do specifically with legal issues at this point, it's necessary to respond to these immediate needs before addressing more complex issues. And it really is about survival. So you can see the priorities there are very much related to the things that have broken down and fallen apart as a result of the natural disaster. And so things around communication, shelter, water, food, medical assistance, family reunification, and then power and Wi-Fi. And while the immediate needs of food, shelter, and water will take priority, legal issues will surface very quickly. Landlord and tenant issues are common. If a patron tells you they've been evicted from a damaged home, there's a good chance it's an illegal eviction and the person needs immediate referral to local legal help. Document loss is also common in disaster. Patrons may not have access to the information that they're going to need. For instance, homeowners or renters insurance, a copy of the deed to the house, a copy of their electric bill. Libraries can help patrons find this info. And replacing essential identification is crucial for being able to drive legally, to access bank accounts, and to apply for assistance programs. And restoring income is necessary to begin recovery. So applications for unemployment, for FEMA and Small Business Association disaster loans and other public benefits, these may require legal help to be able to apply and resolve. And then libraries can also offer the basics of Wi-Fi and charging stations, online access, digital literacy, things. So we talk about a timeline of legal issues following a disaster. There's the first 6 weeks, which are in some ways the most urgent, but then there's also medium and long-term issues as well. So starting with the short term, the first 6 weeks, you have issues around housing. As we said, there could be lease terminations, there could be utility shutoffs, security deposits that are in jeopardy, repair issues, FEMA applications, insurance claims, lots of things like that. We talked about document replacement, the different types of documents that you're going to need, and then income protection. There can be issues around wage theft and price gouging and things like that, unemployment applications, public benefits applications, and loan applications. So lots of different legal issues that start to emerge in those first 6 weeks. And then as we move into the medium term, those are the ones that occur 1 to 6 months after the event, and often are in the continuation or appeal of a decision from an earlier application for assistance. It could be a FEMA determination or a dispute over the amount of proceeds from an insurance claim. It's also during this time that survivors might experience, as I said, price gouging or contractor scams. They might need assistance clearing property titles. These are all ways that reference librarians can step in and help to provide some direction to agencies that can help. And then it's also important to note that legal issues can carry on for months or years. Families may be living in really difficult situations as they wait. They're dealing with foreclosures, bankruptcies, civil and disability rights cases, among others. Legal issues are far-reaching. So it's important to keep that in mind as well, that these are going to continue for quite a while. So fortunately, there are many organizations that are dedicated to being first responders for the spectrum of survival needs. As reference staff, you need to know what other local, state, and federal agencies are doing in response to this and communicate that information to patrons. And in that way, you can be part of a network that is working to support the community. So there's different types of assistance that patrons might have access to, and the library can help with this. So FEMA, housing assistance, the Federal Emergency Management Association, housing assistance. It's important to note that that really is meant only to repair the house to minimal livable conditions, which means that the house is safe to live in and it's sanitary. The assistance is not meant to restore a survivor's home to a complete pre-disaster status. Additionally, not everyone who's been affected by disaster will be eligible to receive FEMA disaster assistance. There will be no duplication of benefits between FEMA insurance and Small Business Association loans. The government sets a maximum benefit amount for individual recovery, and FEMA approved just 15% of its applications for individual assistance in 2021. So reference library staff can help patrons in filling out these applications, understanding what is needed, doing the background work to be that, that informed resource for patrons as they try and recover what they need. Small Business Administration loans, homeowners and renters can get low interest, long-term loans for losses that are not fully covered by insurance. And they do not need to have a business to access SBA loans. So that's an important point to consider. However, if a patron has insurance, they will need to access that first before applying for these other types of assistance. So just to reiterate, the library can be a huge part of the recovery amidst all of these various steps and pieces of information, which is why preparation is key at any point during the year, so that when things happen, there's a plan in place, everyone's familiar with the plan and knows how to implement it, and knows the steps of this. So after a natural disaster, you as the library want to be able to reopen soon to assist patrons. And so your library should have a plan about reopening. It's probably called the Continuity of Operations Plan. You should find it and read it and think ahead about what situations patrons will be in and what services your library can offer, and how you can prepare for some of the limitations that your library has. Note that there are things that you can do, even if you can't physically reopen. There could be damages to your library and you're just not able to reopen the building safely. Creative planning can allow you to meet these needs even outside of the building. A great example is, for instance, disaster unemployment applications, printing those out and leaving them outside the building for patrons to pick up. And I think, you know, if there's any silver linings with the pandemic, I think many of us and many of our patrons are familiar with things like curbside pickup and take and go kits. So making it clear to the community that they can come and get these materials even though the building itself is closed. And then, you know, providing things like staff who need laptops to be able to do work outside of the library, being able to provide those tools as well. So looking for those ways that you can continue to serve the community, even if the building itself isn't open. So mitigation, preparation, how do I get started? At the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that it's important to develop an action plan. This next section provides you with 3 big steps whose activities can go right into this action plan. And we'll work, I'll give you some minutes at the end of the presentation to think about one step that you can take toward that action plan. So step 1 is connect with partners. Step 2 is build a disaster collection. And step 3 is help your community plan. So now that you have an idea of the urgent needs that can arise during a disaster and how your library can be a hub of communication and connections, this is really the best time to start building your network of resources and partners and legal providers. Educate yourself and make connections so that you are ready when your patrons need you. If your library has already been providing civil legal reference to patrons, it's likely you have a head start on that planning. So where can library staff begin to find legal partners where they can refer patrons? Reach out to your legal aid partners, lawhelp.org. They'll help you find the legal aid in your area, and they'll be happy to hear from the library and happy to help you make successful referrals for your patrons. Disaster Legal Services provides free legal help to low-income disaster survivors. If you're not able to get adequate legal services for your disaster-related needs, DLS may be able to help. FEMA provides a service through an agreement with the Young Lawyers Division of the American Bar Association, but they may only provide advice and assist with cases that will not generate a fee. For cases that may generate a fee, the ABA may refer you to a local lawyer referral service. So what DLS can help with things like insurance claims for medical bills, loss of property and loss of life, new wills, powers of attorney, other legal papers that are lost during the disaster, home repair contracts and contractors, problems with landlords, proof of home ownership, FEMA appeals, lots and lots of different things. Note that DLS attorneys are not FEMA employees. The services they provide are confidential and they do not share that information with FEMA. ABA's Free Legal Answers is another resource that you can rely on. So as you're building this network, connecting with these partners is so important. Really look for ways that you can build relationships, especially in blue sky times, what we call blue sky times, when you're not in the middle of a disaster. For instance, as soon as this presentation is over, I urge you to begin making connections with your disaster resource network. Start with local emergency management. They often lead the initial efforts. Who can you get to know there, and how might that be beneficial for your library? Often the problem that's preventing a patron from recovering from a disaster is a civil legal problem, and knowing where to refer patrons for legal assistance can make all the difference for that survivor. And so librarians can prepare to assist patrons by joining local COADs, COADs, community organizations active in disaster. A COAD is a local group of community organizations that coordinates emergency human services while working in concert with partner agencies, including the local emergency management agency, social service agencies, and nonprofit organizations that are involved in disaster preparedness, response, and recovery during all of the stages of a disaster. Additionally, you can find your state's organs, VOAD, voluntary organizations active in disaster, to learn about the different players in the disaster response in your area and how your library can help. You can also look for statewide organizations and long-term recovery groups and gather information from these organizations to speed up assistance and referral for disaster impacted clients. Being involved in these organizations and maintaining contacts is really the only way to know what assistance is available and where the assistance is located. You can connect with your local bar association as well. They'll have some volunteer lawyers specializing in disasters. And then faith-based institutions are good resources as well. These relationships will take time to build and be nurtured, but libraries know how to be good partners. And so for tips on creating strong partnerships, WebJunction has a guide called the Community Partnership and Collaboration Guide on webjunction.org that you can check out that can help you begin this process. So that's step one, building your disaster network. Now you want to build a collection. And these are a few sites that you can use to begin to build this collection. Gather your FEMA resources, gather brochures, gather these checklists. There's local emergency preparation resources as well as national ones. When you have them together and you're able to access them easily, it becomes that much easier in the event of a disaster. There's also a get a game plan checklist that you can find online that helps your patrons during these blue sky times be aware of what they need to pull together again. So having that really robust collection and knowing what's in it and how to use it is really key. And then step three, help your community plan for what they will need in a disaster. You can do this by putting on an event. Plan a disaster preparation event for your patrons. Find local partners who can present at the library. And in this way, you can empower your patrons to be prepared to have these things in place. And it might make things just a little bit easier in the midst of what is always a really tough time. I will point out too, September, which is only a few months away, is Disaster Preparation Month, and that can be a good time to do some of this work, if not sooner. And then get a game plan, encouraging your patrons to have a game plan in place, to know where is their emergency kit. Do they have a plan for their various family members who might be spread out across a wide area? What do they do about pets and animals? Do they have a financial plan in place in the instance of a disaster? And so ready.gov is a really good resource to rely on there. kind of help people pull that game plan together. And assemble documents. So this is another patron preparation step. Securing documents is just so important to be prepared for the array of legal issues that might arise from the disaster. A lot of these we talked about already, those identification pieces. Recent photos of you, your loved ones, and your pets are good things to have. Emergency contact information, your social security card, your veterans or military ID, medical information. Do you have prescriptions? Do you have allergies? Information on your main doctor, all of that. Financial and property documents. Once the threat of immediate harm is passed, having your homeowners or renters insurance policy, your bank account information, and your other household resources and contacts will be really important as you begin the recovery process. So make sure that you're conveying to your patrons that they need to know where to access their deed and lease agreement, hopefully outside of their home, homeowners and renters insurance policy, bank account information, loan information, all of those various things. And then documents related to family issues. Are your patrons in the midst of child custody situations or adoptions? Are there marriage and divorce papers that are needed? Orders of protection, restraining orders, really making sure that that paperwork is safe and cared for. Wills, powers of attorney, declaration of guardianship, and any trust documents. So all of these really important documents, really making it clear to patrons, know where these are, have these in a safe place, and stepping in to kind of help them pull that together. So those 3 steps again, working to build your networks with all sorts of emergency management services and legal services at various levels, building that robust resource collection that you can draw on to help inform you and to provide information for your patrons, and then really educating your patrons on the steps that they can take to be empowered before a natural disaster happens. So amidst all of this information and these steps to prepare, perhaps the most difficult piece, of course, is motivation. It's blue skies times, things are fine. And, never mind that this is the time to engage in this work and take action. So the quotes on the slide are, and the docs are meant to be a little bit funny, but also to point out some really wise advice. Scare tactics will only be so useful. Empowerment is really more effective. Taking the information that you learn through the steps that you've taken, building your networks, learning from the people that are around you that are offering assistance, and then using it to show your community the small steps that they can take to have control over their situation in a time of disaster. Also remember that everyone who works in the library is also a community member and needs to prepare for themselves and their family. So empower your staff as well and figure out what motivates them. That might help you motivate your community as well. So I know it seems like I've thrown a lot of information at you today. I've seen a few things come in the chat that I will take a look at in a second. But in many ways, this really is just an initial look at some far more complex issues and processes. So where can you go to get more information? And this is where I wanted to talk a little bit about WebJunction's free course series that can provide you with some background information on how you can provide crucial reference assistance for your patrons before, during, and following a natural disaster. So it is a 3-course series: disaster response network, trauma response and disaster assistance, and then ongoing issues and mitigation. And so to illustrate and explain each of the topics that are listed on the slide, the courses include videos by subject matter experts, as well as survivor testimonials that are really powerful to listen to. And we also have transcribed those. So if it's easier for you to read a transcript, those are available. We have links to handy checklists that you can give to patrons to help them assemble and secure those important documents, information on how folks with disabilities who may need extra assistance can get through a disaster, as well as resources and tips on how to become informed and thereby help your patrons to be informed about all of the processes related to FEMA and loans and fraud avoidance and all of that. If you remember earlier, I talked about some of the limitations to FEMA and insurance assistance related to homes. In the course, you'll learn something about something called Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery, or CDBG-DR. It's a mouthful of an acronym, but it is a federal program that may be able to accommodate longer-term unmet housing needs of individuals. And so for this program, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, distributes money focused on long-term recovery efforts to states that have a presidential disaster declaration. Each state chooses how they want to administer the funds for communities within their state. They may distribute the funds to subrecipients or subgrantees who then address needs at an individual level. And so our course provides information on how to connect your patrons with that resource. We also provide activities that prompt you to develop your own localized set of resources and emergency response agencies. And there's a disaster recovery plan template from the New Jersey State Library that you can download to help you. Readings and forums also help to deepen your learning and provide peer input. And of particular note, thinking about the disaster resource collection that I talked about a minute ago, you will be building a disaster response and recovery binder throughout the course with handouts and various pieces of information that you will print out and put into a physical binder. And this is so important because it provides you with a hard copy assemblage of the important documents that you need at the reference desk when power and Wi-Fi are out and you're not able to access them online. So in addition to the 3-course series that you see on this slide on navigating civil legal issues of natural disasters, we also have a separate course on creating pathways to civil legal justice, which provides some of that foundational knowledge and skills for recognizing general civil legal issues and directing library users to relevant and helpful information and services. So to enroll, all you do is just go to webjunction.org and create an account, select the course and begin. In addition to the course, we have supplemental materials that provide additional and expanded information. And this can be a way to learn some of this information little by little as you go, rather than diving into a whole course. And so we have an article that is called 5 Things That You Didn't Know About Civil Legal Issues of Natural Disasters. It's a really great article. It provides all sorts of really good information into some of the important aspects of disaster response for reference librarians. We have a 1-hour archived webinar that you can watch as an introduction to this material, as well as an article about how these issues can change over time and how to provide ongoing assistance. So we're providing you with lots of different ways to dive in and learn, whether you have 1 hour, 1 day, a week, or more. And there's also the opportunity to learn as a group. We really believe in the power of group learning and peer learning. And so we provide both a general facilitation guide that kind of helps someone who wants to step in and lead a group of learners feel prepared and to plan for all of the different pieces of setting that up. And then we also have a guide that is specific to the subject of civil legal needs in times of disaster. And so we're really, supporting every aspect of that group learning process. And so you could learn with colleagues within your library across a system, however it is that might work for you. So before I wrap up, I want to take a moment to just talk about how you can take care of yourself and your community amidst all of these civil legal issues that arise from a natural disaster. And as I said earlier, part of the uniqueness of natural disaster work is that library staff are likely experiencing the same events and trauma that the patrons are experiencing in the midst of this disaster. So there's an added layer of staff trauma as well as patron trauma. And so how do we begin to approach this work when people are experiencing so many hardships, and how do we take care of ourselves? So many of us are familiar with trauma-informed care. It recognizes that traumatic experiences terrify, overwhelm, and violate the individual. Trauma-informed care is a commitment not to repeat these experiences, and in whatever way possible to restore a sense of safety, power, and worth. And I think The mitigation steps that I was talking about before speak to that directly. The more that we can inform and empower our community members to know what steps they can take and to be prepared before a disaster happens, the more that you are operating from a trauma-informed care perspective. So why use a trauma-informed approach? You know, patrons are feeling overwhelmed. They're feeling disempowered. They may be feeling ignored or unheard, especially in the midst of big government agencies that they're trying to get money from or assistance from. And so what can you do? You can offer choice wherever is possible. That's giving them that chance to feel empowered, slowing down and listening empathetically, breaking complex concepts down into smaller, simpler steps. And this really comes from being as educated as you can be, so that then you can explain it as simply as you can to folks when they're in a tough situation. And then remembering to take care of yourself. You know, there's that adage of putting your own mask on first before you help others. That is true here as well. One of the resources that's available to you in our Web Junction series is a handout that has pocket phrases to use when communicating with the public during a disaster. And a pocket phrase is like a brief sentence or two that you can use when maybe you don't know what the right thing is to say, you don't have that top of mind. Practicing these, having them printed out at the desk can kind of help you fall back on them and implement a trauma-informed approach to your reference work around natural disasters. So remember to take breaks, process your own experiences, and put your own mask on first. So at the beginning of the presentation, I said that I wanted you all to work on an action plan that can serve as a launching off point for the work you're going to do to prepare your library and your community for the next natural disaster. So if you want to take maybe a couple minutes and just think about everything that you've heard and how you might begin. What is one step that you could take after today's summit to prepare yourself, your library, and your community for the next natural disaster? And if you want to put ideas in the chat, you can, or you can take some time to do some self-reflection.
While folks are working on that, we actually got some great tips from folks in the chat that might be worth sharing, but we can wait later if you think that makes more sense.
Either way, that's fine.
Alana mentioned that one of the major challenges to FEMA assistance she found is that there are not enough FEMA staff to help with applications, and apps are often rejected for small errors rather than the organization reaching out for correction. It's not often clear to the applicant that they should look for an error and resubmit.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And that's another area where a librarian can just take an extra look, be a little bit of an outside perspective on those applications and just see how they look.
Jennifer mentioned a low-hanging fruit idea: help patrons build a spreadsheet of an inventory of their valuables proactively. If patrons make a detailed inventory of valuables, appliances, jewelry, furniture, etc., they will only be reimbursed, compensated if they have the details of the items. If it's itemized as, example, toaster, they will only be reimbursed for the cheapest toaster on the market. It's hard to find this info after a disaster has occurred. I learned this from individuals helping post wildfires a few years ago.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I love the idea of a spreadsheet, an inventory of your own belongings. That's great.
And then Lee mentioned that another legal partner could be your local county law library.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think Meredith says perhaps an adult blue skies take and make. I love that. That is a disaster plan fireproof pouch that puts steps in place. Yeah, I think that's great. And Holly says, I do need to find our continuity of services plan. I think that's an excellent first step. These are great. Well, I hope you all have put in some good steps for you to take as part of your action plan. As you can see, reference librarians have a crucial role in informing, assisting, and supporting your communities when it comes to managing natural disasters. You can offer so much to your communities to help them survive and thrive. And I hope I've convinced you to start your work during the Blue Sky Days. So I want to just say thank you. Thank you to the Oregon Reference Summit for having me. I want to also acknowledge that the project out of which the courses and resources came was made possible by a partnership with the Legal Services Corporation, as well as OCLC's ongoing support of the WebJunction program. And that URL is a short URL to get to the course information on the site. So thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to your questions. I see Sarah Pete. Is that how you pronounce your last name? You're at the Washington State Library.
Yes, you got it. Yeah, thank you so much. It was a great presentation, and I really appreciate like all the kind of concrete things that makes sense for libraries to do. And I don't mean this in a way at all that I'm suggesting libraries not be helpful, but I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, like, I don't know, maybe the job creep that happens a little bit, where it's like, oh, like, you know, we're not emergency employees, you know, and also, like, of course, library workers are going through the same thing that the community is going through, may not have power at home, and all the stresses of, you know what I mean? So just sort of, I'm just interested in your take on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that was one thing that I'm sort of realizing I didn't do a good enough job of pointing out. I think that is where having those resources, building those networks during a time before a disaster is so key. And there can be scope creep there as well. But I think it's a little bit of front loading some work to be able to make things a little bit smoother and easier in the event of a disaster. And knowing where those partners are that can step in and help do that work for you. Because it's also important to point out, and this is something that comes up in that foundational course, that you cannot give legal advice. You can refer patrons to legal services. You can point them in the direction of you know, information and assistance and help them with applications and things, but you cannot give them legal advice. And so I think being mindful of that water's edge and trying to make a plan within your library of what steps do you feel like you're able to take given everything else that is on your plate, and then where are those partnerships that can help with that lift, and making those connections so that you're ready for when it's time to make use of those connections. But you're right, it is a lot of work. And I think, you know, preparation needs to be done within the realistic constraints of what everyone's capacity is too. So I hope that's helpful. I certainly don't have all of the answers on that. I'd love to hear if other folks have ideas on how to kind of manage scope creep with all of this.
Thank you. That was definitely helpful.
Do folks have experience already with providing reference services during a disaster? I'd love to hear how that has gone, what's worked, what hasn't, you know, where you felt like you've needed some more resources.
Remember at the lab, this is Sarah again. I used to work at the public library, and we did have binders, for all of the times when the power went out, or and it just kind of gave you the nice analog list of steps to take, things to do, who's gonna like help empty the building and all of that stuff. So it is something that's kind of easier for me to forget in my current, very digital job. But having those analog pieces can be extremely necessary when the power goes out.
For sure. Yeah. And one thing we've talked about is that disaster response and recovery binder, even having one that maybe travels on a bookmobile or something too, to the extent that you're able to provide services that way if the building is closed or something. But yeah, having that hard copy can be really key. I see both a hand and a comment in the chat. The comment in the chat is we have had dealt with reference services around heat issues, getting fans, where to go for cooling, things like that. That's great. Yeah, heat is definitely something that we're all having to deal with. Jennifer Cox, want to read?
Yeah, I guess just around the whole thing of how to position ourselves is just really hitting home that we're really great as a resource for preparation, and selling it as that, because I think it's so much harder to do it in the moment. Not that there aren't, regarding heat waves and whatnot, but so I think a lot of people know that I run Answerland, and we kind of have to treat in kind of like personal crisis the same way, where how do we train staff members to be able to respond to patrons that are in crisis, and that's that whole kind of preparation element. And I think that that's just, rather than burdening ourselves, like we all love to be helpful, but really selling it as we are the preparers. We will help you with the preparation, but it's hard for us to do it sometimes in the moment. So
I really like that point. And that again speaks to that, taking the time to educate yourself with, what are the things that you can do to help your community prepare? What are the things that you can do to help yourself prepare? And then, what services do you feel like your library can realistically offer and help with in the time of disaster, and kind of having that plan, that policy in place, I think is really key. Alana says, I was a business librarian during the wildfires occurring at the same time as the beginning of the pandemic. Yeah, that's right. There's not much precedent. I was researching as my primary activity of work. Many resources were created and fully impacted with applicants within days. So yeah, lots of research work, lots of trying to figure it out in the moment, maybe can help provide some preparation efforts for the next fire season. Great questions, great thoughts. Thank you for these.
I have a question about collections. It sounds like a lot of the materials really that are most useful are items that, like you said, you put in a binder and just sort of had available so you could quickly hand them out. Are there items that you would suggest having available in the circulating collection?
Yeah. So that's a place where you can talk with your state and local disaster resource, your state and local legal resource agencies, and kind of see what sorts of materials they might have that you could have on hand at the library that people can use and refer to and learn from. They might be the brochures or manuals or information to be able to make the whole process a little bit easier. But things in the collection, not being a collection development person, I'm a little hesitant to give too much of a recommendation there. I think a lot of it is trying to provide information around what are the different types of assistance, what's involved in those types of assistance, what what are the different agencies that are available? What do they provide? How do you get in touch with them? A lot of it is kind of those reference materials that patrons can access and learn from and be prepared. So.
Thank you. We've sort of come up against time, but we have a little bit more if anyone has any questions. Any additional questions?
You know, Sarah, I'm thinking again about your question about scope creep. And I wonder about, you know, when I think about having learning groups around the course or even trying to build networks across different libraries and different systems, that's another way to mitigate that, because if other systems and other libraries have done some of this work, they can help inform what you do. And that way you're not having to reinvent the wheel each time, but you can leverage work that other libraries and other systems have done and tailor it for your library and your community. So that can be another way to kind of not feel like it's all on your shoulders, but maybe turn to your peers, turn to your colleagues and see, you know, what have they experienced, what have they learned, and how can you apply it in your own situation.
Yeah, and I really liked what you were talking about. I can't remember the acronym now, but it was like that, basically that group of community organizations that are all like there that have agreed to kind of be peripheral. Was it QAB or VUAB?
Yeah, there's COAD.
Okay.
And OAD. Yeah,
Cool.
community and then volunteer. Yeah.
And I think one of the other things I was thinking about, and you know, maybe again, this is just from my many years at an under-resourced public library, as most of them are, is just like, you know, like kind of what happened with tax forms. It's like the IRS stopped doing it. Then we took on all this extra work. We got literally no financial support or staff training to do it. And of course, we figure it out. That's what we do. We help people. But it's just like, you know, how many of these like sort of community needs can we fill without getting any of that infrastructural support, you know, or extra like add in to do it. And so, but I really do like, you know, I think that, you know, we should be a good community partner in it, you know, at the very least, like being very connected and knowledgeable of all the places in our communities that, you know, are tasked with helping in disasters is a, you know, a great start.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. I see Holly says, I do have a list at my branch for who is doing what. That includes updating these sorts of resources. I think that's great. Having that very clear roles and responsibilities can help lighten the load for everyone. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you.
That was incredibly helpful and informative. Thank you again. And just so everyone knows, we're going on a quick break, but our next session does start at 11. And so we'll see you back here then.